Hey guys, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I'm Greg. Today I thought it would be fun to talk about reading habits and how I read. You know, reading is kind of like a races, there's no wrong way to do it. And how you read is shaped by a lot of different factors, like your commute or your schedule, and it goes beyond environmental factors. It also depends on your personal preferences, how you engage with the books that you're reading, and what you hope to get out of the experience. And because all of those circumstances change over time, your reading evolves as well. I'm definitely not the same reader that I was 5 years ago, or let alone 10 or 20 years ago. So this is how I read, and if you want to tell me how you read, I would love to hear about that. The first thing is when. Now, I used to live in New York City, so I had a built-in hour and a half to 2 hours of commute every single day where I was on the subway and I had that guaranteed time to read. That was when I did the bulk of my reading. One of the hardest adjustments that I had to make when I moved away from the city was that I lost that commute. I had a 5 minute commute and it was in a car, so I had to drive. Obviously, I couldn't read while I was doing that. And it was a really hard adjustment. I had to find time in my day to get my reading in. Now, reading before bed is a habit of mine that goes way back to childhood. It helps me feel like I can settle my mind and bring myself back down to like a baseline so I can go to sleep. I've really reclaimed reading in bed in recent years since we moved away from the city because it's helped me get back that time that I lost from the commute. If I'm reading in bed, I do tend to do an audiobook or an ebook instead of a physical book because I have a husband and he's in bed next to me, so if I have the light on I feel like I'm bothering him and I don't want to, I want him to be able to sleep, so I tend to default to one of those two. I save using the light for a book that I'm really into or I really want to finish. And for physical books, my best time to read is lunchtime or in that little window between when we've had dinner and before we all settle down on the couch to watch something on TV. I get a lot of time in with a physical book then. And when we watch TV, I bring the book with me in case we're watching something that I'm not really into, because then I can cram in some extra pages and it works out really well. Second, let's talk about bookmarking. Now, first of all, I never, ever, under any circumstances, dog-ear a page. Only barbarians do that. I don't do it. For a long time, I used index cards as bookmarks. And the reason I did that was because it helped me take notes as I was reading a book. It could be a passage that stood out to me or a quote that I really liked, a detail about a character that I thought was interesting, or a detail about the book that I thought was interesting. Could be an observation or a question that I had. Any number of things, and I would just note them down. I have my copy of the Wind Up Bird Chronicle here because this one, actually, I took a lot of notes. I even used a piece of scrap paper to note what I considered a significant passage and reminded myself to compare that with a different character and the overall theme of isolation. I have a lot of notes on this index card. And you can see I try to collect them in certain categories. Like one of the reasons I really liked doing this was that it helped me notice recurring things in the book or themes in the book, things that the author kept going back to. Like in this one, there are obviously birds because Murakami is very big on that. There's detachment. People kept getting renamed. My dog would like to say hello. And there was questions about reality and marks and things like that. So I noted all of them down here and starred what I considered to be important ones so I could go back to them. As you can guess, this was really easy for me to do when I had a commute and I was on the subway because I was sitting and I could have a pen in it and I could do it. It's more difficult for me to do when I don't have that commute. So I had to start moving away from it. Also because when you don't really have that time built into your day, keeping up with this starts to feel like a lot of work. And you don't want reading to feel like a lot of work. Sometimes you do, because when I do go back to this when I have like a project book or a book that I really want to go through and I want to do a deep dive on. But it's a little too much for me right now. Now I tend to use bookmarks from my favorite independent bookstores. There's Northshire Bookstore in Vermont and Shakespeare and Company right here where I live. It is not the Shakespeare and Company that you're thinking of, but it is a really great store. So I use these and I kind of repurpose them and reuse them between books as I go through. Another reason I've kind of gotten away from this method of bookmarking and note-taking is that I found that I did this with hundreds of books, and I only really ever referred back to a handful, like maybe five. One of them was a nice surprise. I read Netherland by Joseph O'Neill and took notes on it, and then I read it again in a college course. And it was really nice to have those notes because I could immediately go back to my first reading of it and pick up where I had left off and go even deeper than that. It was really nice. But I do really want to get back to this at some point because it helps me be a better reader. And I want to, but I have to sort out time a little bit better so it doesn't feel like an obligation or a job. On that note, I should tell you, I almost never mark up the books themselves, just because I don't like to do it. Part of it is that the same reason I don't like to dog-ear the books. It feels just wrong somehow. And part of it is that it feels really personal, what you mark in a book. So if I loan somebody my copy of the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles, all I have to do is take these out, and they can read this book and have their own experience without me pointing them in a specific direction or without really calling attention to the things that were meaningful to me. But if I've marked up the book, then it feels like a window into me, which is a little weird. So I don't really do it. The only time I really do it is when I know that it's a book that can be a little personal or something I will refer back to. Catcher in the Rye is a book that was very meaningful to me for a long time. I have marked up and underlined passages in this one, but this is also because I have 2 copies of this book. I have actually I have 3 copies. I have a hardcover, a trade paperback, like the bigger one, and I have this mass market, and I've marked up the mass market. So otherwise, I don't really do it very often. In terms of the format of what I read, I have really been leaning into audiobooks in the last year and a half, and it's transformed me as a reader. I read a lot more, for one thing, because I can read while I'm working and while I'm driving, and that works. I can get a lot more in, and that's really great, but it's also expanded the content that I engage with. I have always had a goal to read more nonfiction, and I listen to a lot of nonfiction on audio, and I think that's because I started out by listening to podcasts, which are almost overwhelmingly nonfiction, and so listening to a nonfiction book on audio feels like listening to a podcast for me. It's kind of in the same wheelhouse, and it's how I like to do nonfiction books. I don't do as many fiction books on audio if I can help it, because I do think it makes me less of an engaged reader. There are moments where your attention lapses and you might have to go back, and I don't like that. And I feel like nonfiction is a little more forgiving in a way. It depends on the nonfiction. But I try to only do things on audio that I feel like I can get away with that experience. Another thing that's really good about audios for me is that I feel like it gives a second chance to something. So if I pick up a book, and let's say Mouthful of Birds, which I just finished actually. So if I'm reading this and I feel like I kind of like it, but I'm not really engaged with it, I might put down the physical book and get on a wait list for the audio. And the audio kind of lets me power through it, and it gives books a second chance. I do still DNF ruthlessly these days, but I feel like I'm a little bit more open to possibilities as a reader with the audios. And like I said, the flip side of that is that I'm not as engaged of a reader as I am with audiobooks that I am with a physical book, because I don't know, there's something visual about being able to look at the page and see the word helps me absorb it. And you do get distracted eventually. I think I mentioned in my Black History Month reads that I'm on the wait list for Toni Morrison's Beloved. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I feel like that's a book that I'm really going to want to have in front of me. But I want to try it because Toni Morrison herself reads it, and I think that's going to be very interesting to listen to. For that reason, you can probably guess, I prefer physical books over everything else. It helps me be a more analytical reader and pick up on things. Audiobooks are basically utilitarian for me. I feel like they just hold my attention. There's something nice about holding them. So really, physical books are the way to go for me. I went through a phase where I did a lot of ebooks, and that's been on a big downturn for me in the last year or two. I liked them for a while because it felt like I could always have them with me. As long as I had my phone, which I always have my phone, I had my book with me. So if I had a moment's notice, if I'm in a doctor's office and I have a longer wait, then I thought I could just pull out my phone and I've got my book. And it was easy. Part of why I think I've had such a downturn with ebooks is that ease of use is an issue for me with them, because if I'm reading Mouthful of Birds and I'm on one story and something comes up and I think, oh, that's funny, wasn't that in the other story? It's really easy for me to flip and say, okay, here's that story and there's the thing. Or if I'm reading a book and there's a little thing about a character and I think, didn't they do this? It feels easy for me to flip back, find what I'm talking about, and I don't have that same experience with an ebook, and it irritates me. Even with an audiobook, I listen to them on my phone, and I can skip back 15 seconds and skip back 15 seconds. It's only really good for that short-term recall, but it works. And with an ebook, it feels like there's a lot more maneuvering around, and I don't like it. I think the real issue is that I don't want more screen time in my life. I spend the entire day looking at my laptop screen for work, and then all day I'm staring at my phone screen as well for work and for social media and for games, and that carries into the night. Even if I'm listening to an audiobook, I do it through an app on my phone called Libby, which it's a library app. It uses Overdrive. If you're interested, I recommend it. But even then, if I'm listening to an audio, I need my phone. So I feel like I'm surrounded by screens, and I don't want to look at them anymore. I kind of just need that break. So I think that's another reason that I've had such a downturn with ebooks. And finally, when it comes to buying or borrowing, the answer is almost always borrowing. I don't have the budget to buy every book that I would like to read, so that's a big factor for me. It makes me go to the library. Plus, I also think it's really important to support your local libraries. They're good for your community. They provide so many services, and I don't want them to ever go away. So they serve each other. It helps me not break my wallet, and it helps my community in a much larger sense. I'm kind of careful about the books that I buy. I want them to be, like, I don't have Fever Dream because I got it from the library, but I knew I liked Samantha Schweblin because of Fever Dream, so I was willing to spend money on Mouthful of Birds when it came out. I have limited shelf space as well, so I feel like if there's a book that I only kind of meh about, it feels like it's just taking up space. If there's a book that I don't like, I've gotten rid of most of the books that I hated the most when I talked about them. But Adam is sitting right here, and it actually bothers me that it is still in my presence. I should probably just get rid of it. But, so that's another thing. It's just the question of space. I have a lot of books that I want to read and don't want to get rid of, and I have some books that I enjoyed, so I don't want to fill them up too much. So that's how I read. If you want to tell me how you read, I would love to hear it. I'm very interested. I always think different ways people read are fascinating. And if you have recommendations, or like I said, I use Libby for audiobooks. It's powered by Overdrive. For audiobooks, if you have other recommendations for that, if you have recommendations for ebooks that will make me feel like I'm not staring at a screen all day, or other ways of being an analytical reader without taking insane notes like the ones I took for the Wind Up Bird Chronicles, let me know. I would love to hear that as well. And I'll be back. Until then, happy reading. And thank you again for watching this video and saying hello to my dog when he was here. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing, and I will be back. Thank you.